You may have seen on the news or noticed a lack of sexually implicit content on your Instagram feed if you were one of the 13 million followers of the Pornhub's Instagram account that was recently removed. Whether you think this was the right thing to do or not, it brings up the topic of sexually implicit content. And there's a lot of sexually implicit content all over social media, in advertisements, in magazines, and in shop window displays. Now, of course, sexually explicit content is reserved for adults, but sexually implicit content is widely seen by everybody. And what makes something sexually implicit is not as clearly defined as what makes something sexually explicit. Therefore, it can be more difficult to explain this to our kids. So in this video, we're not going to focus on how to talk about sexually explicit content, aka porn, but we're going to focus on how to have ongoing conversations with our kids about sexually implicit content. I'm Kathleen, and I make videos for parents on how to have the modern day sex talks. How do you know if something is sexually implicit? Take a look at these photos and you tell me which one is sexually implicit. Everyone's got an opinion on whether something is sexually implicit or not. Now, if I was to show those photos to 100 folks, there would not be 100% agreement amongst them on which ones were sexually implicit. As a society, we've all agreed on the definition of what is sexually explicit. Basically, it's what we see in porn: sex, nakedness, and masturbation. But just like in 1964, when Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart attempted to explain what is obscene in pornography, he stated, and I quote, "I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material I understand to be embraced, but I know it when I see it." This quote, shortened to "I know it when I see it," is relevant to parents today trying to explain to their kids what sexually implicit content is, because it's mainly values-based. One parent might say that this picture is sexually implicit, while another parent says, no, it's not. Another parent might say that this photo is sexually implicit, while another parent says, it's not. And the same goes for this photo. None of these photos are sexually explicit. They all completely align with the YouTube terms of service and agreement around sexual content. But depending on your individual values and beliefs, you may categorize them at different points on the sexual implicit scale. Before we jump into how to talk to your kids about sexually implicit versus explicit content, let's take a look at where your values and beliefs land on the scale of sexual content. At one end of the scale, we've got sexually explicit content, and at the other end of the scale, we've got not sexually implicit content. So we know what falls into this area, sexually explicit content. It's what we see in porn: actual sex acts, masturbation, and nudity of the genitals. And on the other end of the scale, we've got not sexually implicit content. By definition, something that is not sexually implicit will not contain reference to sexuality, sexual language, or euphemisms. It would be something that everybody would unanimously agree is not sexually implicit. And then everything else that is sexually implicit would fall somewhere in between those two ends of the scale. So go ahead and place these pictures where you think they would belong on the scale, and then ask your partner or co-parent or a friend where they would place these pictures. You might be thinking, why in the world do I need to explain what is sexually implicit content to my preteen and teen? Around this age, your child or their friends will have their own cell phone, and they will most likely use it to view social media. All terms of service for any social media platform requires an individual to abide by a code of conduct, which includes sexual content. At this age, your child and their peers will most likely be experiencing puberty or about to go through puberty, and they will become more aware and conscious of how they look and how they want to present themselves. And side note here, wanting to feel sexy or have someone find you sexy does not equal wanting to have sex. And that's also a great conversation to have with your child at this age. And if you want to know how to explain what is sexy, you can check out this video here, or it's linked in the description. And lastly, by talking about sexually implicit content, you'll get to share your values around the scale and how you view sexually implicit content. And not only will you get to share your values, but you'll also get a glimpse into whether or not they agree with your interpretation. Because they are developing their own values and beliefs based off of their lived experience, which may be similar to your values or not. This sex talk is geared towards your middle and high school age kid. Because in order to talk about what is sexually implicit content, you need to have already had a conversation with them about what is sexually explicit content, i.e. the porn talk. Initiating a conversation with your middle or high school age kid about this topic may seem difficult to do, but you will have plenty of teachable moment opportunities. Just pick one and go from there. For example, if you see an advertisement that's selling something that is not used before, during, or after sexual activity, ask your child, what is the intention of that ad? You could go on to say, although that ad is not sexually explicit, it seems sexually implicit to me, and here's why. Then go on to explain and ask them if they agree or disagree and share their opinion. Or if you're listening to a song with sexually implicit lyrics, ask them if they agree or disagree with the song's message, why or why not. Or you can explain this scale and then show them these images and ask them to decide whether or not they are sexually implicit. And then, of course, share your opinion. And next, if they're going to be using social media, you may want to explain the importance of distinguishing between sexually implicit versus explicit content when posting to social media. You can say something to the effect of, even though there are clear parameters around what makes something sexually explicit, the definition of sexually implicit has a lot of gray areas. Some people will say that this photo is not sexually explicit by definition, but to them, it is overtly sexually implicit. And therefore, if it was posted to a social media site, the site may say that it violates their terms of service around sexual content. Because sexually implicit content is values-based and everyone's values are different. I want you to be aware so that you can abide by the terms of use when using social media, and so that you are more aware of how marketers and advertisers use socially implicit content to sell you things. So did Pornhub violate Instagram's terms of service? Pornhub, by definition, did not post sexually explicit content on their Instagram account. But at some point, someone found some piece of content that was, to them, more towards the sexually explicit end of the scale. Anybody can say that something is sexually explicit without it actually being sexually explicit. And it's good for preteens and teens to understand this. Sexually implicit content is everywhere, and your kid will see it, and it is used to advertise and sell a variety of products. So parents, are you going to have a conversation with your middle or high schooler about sexually explicit versus implicit content? Let me know in the comments. I'm Kathleen, and I'll be back next week with another video.